Steven Milhausen here from DAZN, and it is July 7th, 2021, and I know what July 7th means to me, but today is definitely a special day. It is the 25-year anniversary of when the New World Order formed at the Bash of the Beach, and this gentleman right here, the creator of the New World Order, the one and only Eric Bischoff. And when you think of when you knew this day was coming, Eric, what did it mean to you then when you were thinking about it? And now that the day is here, what does it mean now?
I forgot all about it till this morning when I woke up and my Twitter feed was.
Oh, you're such a liar, Eric. I've talked to you enough. I don't believe you.
No, it's actually true. But there's a reason for it. Conrad Thompson and I have been covering, the NWO and the 25th anniversary of the NWO for about 3 weeks on our podcast, covering each show, covering the shows leading into it. And now we're up to the shows coming out of it and the reaction to it and things. So I feel like I've been talking about, the NWO and the 25th anniversary of it for so long now that the day of the anniversary, I actually forgot it was really happening until I got this morning. I picked up my phone and went, oh my gosh, what is all of this? And okay, well, it's technically today's the 25th anniversary. So I went to I got up about 5:30 this morning, went to the refrigerator, had a beer, and no, I didn't.
Oh, I was going to say, man, that would have been.
No, it's a good story though, right?
Absolutely. I guess just for nerds like me, I was focusing on wanting to talk to you because I know we've talked a lot in the past, and this is really a topic me and you had never discussed, but I guess it's just nerds like me, Eric, are really consumed with a day like this.
Well, no, clearly a lot of people are, like I said, other than when I was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame and obviously the social media that happened as a result of that, I don't think my social media accounts have been this jammed up since then. So it means a lot to a lot of people. And I think people recognize that it was kind of like a really cool point in history where a lot of things changed and a lot of things changed for the better. And some of those changes we're still seeing today, as a result of what we did 25 years ago. And, I was talking about it, to my wife this morning when I realized, what day it was. And she actually pointed out to me, and she's not like a hardcore wrestling fan or anything like that. But she said, Eric, if you think about it from a creative perspective only, it is probably the most significant thing that's happened in the wrestling business in the last, 25, 50 years. Now, arguably, and I would defend, the WWE and say, well, wait a minute. I kind of think Vince McMahon taking wrestling national and kind of breaking the territory paradigm and, all of the things that happened as a result of that, and getting WWF on NBC and things like that. All of those were in their ways just as big, if not bigger, but those were strategic changes. They weren't creative changes. It wasn't a storyline or a character. It was a strategic change. So I do think creatively, perhaps, the NWO and all the things that happened as a result of it were probably one of the most important things that's happened in this industry in our lifetimes.
Do you mute your social media today? Do you turn off those notifications today? Is it one of those things? I know when I break a big story or I write a big story and someone's retweeting it, I know I turn mine off. Do you do that, Eric, or do you just look and you're like, talking about me today?
No, when I do look at I use social media. I mean, it's a tool for me. It's not an obsession. I don't get riled up over things that I read or get, overjoyed with something if it's something positive. I just, I look at it and I kind of watch patterns and I watch the type of things that people react to. I'd say the most fun thing I did after I woke up and I realized I was sitting down this morning early and had my first cup or two of coffee. And I went, you know what? I'm just going to tweet, not a response to anybody. I'm just going to tweet, "You're welcome," and see how many responses I'll get. And while I was waiting to do the show with you, I went, I wonder what it's up to today. It's been a couple hours now. it's over, 180,000 impressions and 2,000 likes and I don't know how many retweets and stuff. And all 2 words, no tag, no emoji, no picture, 2 words, you're welcome. And it's probably one of the most successful posts I've had in months. So I get a kick out of it, but I'm not obsessed with it at all. I don't have to turn it on or off. When I'm busy working and doing other things, I just turn my phone off and focus on what I'm doing. And I check in with it later on in the day.
How many cups of coffee do you have a day? So I'm usually about 3 or 4.
Dude, the only reason I'm afraid to answer that question is because somebody associated with my health insurance coverage may be listening, and I don't want my rates to go up. I drink a fair amount of coffee, but it's all organic coffee, I'll mind you. There's no chemicals in it, all that kind of healthy stuff. But the real key is a specific type of tea that I drink that really, really helps me focus. It gives me a lot of great energy. So.
No, I'm jealous.
The coffee I drink the coffee is just a bad habit, but the tea is magic.
I blame my wife for the coffee.
You do what?
I never drank coffee till I met my wife.
Oh, well, you should be grateful to her.
I am for that, but not since then, Eric. All I do, it's like 3, 4. I just finished my last cup of coffee. We're 4:55 Chicago time. I think I had my last cup of coffee about 2 hours ago.
Yeah, I usually cut myself off around noon. Because then I can't sleep, and that's a downward spiral when I don't get sleep. So
I definitely hear you. And I've listened to all the podcasts that you guys have done, you and Connor have done leading up to today, and I watched the show last night again just to kind of refresh my memory of everything that happened on the entire show. And thinking about in the grand scheme of things, to me, it's always felt like Hulk gets a lot of the credit. Scott gets a lot of the credit. Kevin gets a lot of the credit, and rightfully so. But if you don't go to Japan and see what's going on in Japan and be like, let's try that here, I feel pretty certain this conversation isn't happening. Maybe we're talking about something different, but we're not talking about this. You feel like you don't get the rightful credit that in all actuality you do deserve.
I don't think about it that way. Every once in a while when I do an interview, and like you just mentioned, when you said, not being critical or anything, but when you said, well, if you hadn't gone to Japan and see what they were doing over there, and that's true. That statement is a factual, it's a factual observation. Had I not gone over to Japan as often as I did, had I not been studying the differences between the way Japanese professional wrestling was presented and the way and contrast that to the way American professional wrestling was being presented, it's quite possible the NWO idea might not ever have occurred to me. But there's this narrative, and I don't know where it started. I suspect I know where, but I'm not sure. I'm not going to get you upset today. No, I don't really care, but there's this narrative that's out there that, I went over to Japan and watched an invasion angle play out in UFWI. I've never been to a UFWI event. I've only been to New Japan events in all the years I've been to Japan, other than some K1 kickboxing events that one of them I hosted, or did play-by-play on, I should say. So the idea for the NWO was a result of me seeing how wrestling was presented as a very real sport. There was nothing cartoony. There was nothing gimmicky. Not only was wrestling presented that way by the producers and the promoters, in my case, New Japan Pro Wrestling, but it was covered by the media as a very legitimate sport. I'd go over for the big, New Year's Eve show in the Tokyo Dome. There'd be 60 or 80,000 people, 70, 80,000 people in the Tokyo Dome who had all paid an average ticket price of about $100 to $150 American, to be in the building. And they were all wearing suits and ties, the men, and the women were all dressed up. And it looked more like, a sporting event of what boxing used to be like back in the day. And it was a reality and the legitimacy that I went, okay, that's what's working here in Japan. Because meanwhile, back in the States, it was all very cartoony, gimmicky, silly, kiddie wrestling. And I mean, WCW was doing it as well as WWE. So I went, okay, I got to find a way to bring that reality that I see over in Japan into the United States. That was the impetus of the catalyst, I should say, of the NWO idea. It wasn't going, oh, here's an invasion wrestling angle that's working over there, I'm going to do it here. I know that's a narrative, that it's not the case. But had I not been over in Japan, I wouldn't have felt the need to bring to contrast what was really going on in the States with what I felt needed to be done.
I'll ask you a question that I don't think you've really answered, at least the best of my knowledge. Maybe you have, and I just haven't seen it. I'll go back. Where was WCW in your mind before you thought about creating the NWO? Where do you think the company was at before you had that idea?
Well, we were making good progress. When I came to WCW in 91, the company was a dismal, distant number 2. It could have just as easily been number 222 in comparison to the WWE at that time. It was losing money hand over fist. It was dysfunctional in many respects, but it was owned by Turner Broadcasting, and everybody was getting paid, and it was still, compared to where I came from, I left the AWA. For me, it was still a great gig, even though I knew it was what it was, and it was basically dysfunctional and not very successful. But I'm not saying this was all because of me, but when I took over the company essentially in 94, I started turning things around, and WCW went from being kind of the redheaded stepchild that nobody really wanted to show up to a family dinner in Turner Broadcasting to becoming a fairly successful part of Turner Broadcasting. Not completely successful, but by 1995, I had turned that thing around financially. We went from being, not 1995, but I think 96 was the first year we made $1 of profit. In the history of WCW, since Ted Turner started it, no one had ever been able to find a way to make it profitable. And because of the success that we were having pre-NWO, I was given more and more latitude. I was given bigger budgets. I was given the opportunity to do Monday Nitro on prime time on TNT because of the fact that we had started turning the company around really in 93 and 94. So the company was well on its way to becoming healthy and viable. It's just that the NWO, when that happened, kind of took it, it was a hockey stick. It wasn't a gradual improvement. It was a hockey stick in the sense of going straight up.
Yeah.
It just changed everything. And what made it so fun is that, it wasn't overnight, but it felt that way. It's like, whoa, 1 minute, we're lucky to put 3,000 people in the arena. And the next minute we're putting 30,000 people in the arena. Kind of cool.
Like you said there, it kind of just went. And do you ever, I know you're not one to, like you said, you're not one to go, yeah, look at me, but do you have to pat yourself on the back there? Because you're like, man, this is pretty cool. The fact that we went from, like you said, drawing 3,000 people, the Bash at the Beach show, you had to turn people away. You unfortunately, and the reason you gave on the podcast, I thought was the right one of why you had the comps for the advertisers and the radio shows and the media and stuff of that nature. But you're going from 3,000 to sold out arenas to starting at 6,800 or whatever the number was to 30,000 people packing stadiums. Did you ever take that seat back and just kind of soak it in a little bit? Or was it just everything was going so quick, you really didn't have time to grasp everything of what was going on?
No, it's the latter. Everything was happening so fast that you really don't have time to soak it all in. And the truth is, I screwed up enough stuff that it kept me balanced.
Oh,
like, for every one really good thing you do, there's like 3 or 4 little things that oh gosh, I wish I wouldn't have done that. So it wasn't until afterwards, I think, really until the last couple of years, probably because of doing the podcast.
Yeah.
that I've really even reflected back on my career. I know I've done interviews in the past, even before the podcast and things like that. And I've had strong opinions about the business and still do. But I never, I just never took the time to pat myself on the back for it. I will, in the course of a conversation or, an interview like this, I'll recognize, did some pretty cool stuff that no one else had ever done. Did some pretty cool stuff that no one else had ever done. That is the reason we're watching a lot of what we're watching today is because of what we did and what we broke ground with in 1995 with Nitro, certainly 1996 with the NWO. So I'm aware of it, but it's like I said, I screwed up enough other stuff that it keeps me balanced. Conrad keeps me balanced is why
he does. I noticed that.
Yeah.
You look at, I rewatched the pay-per-view last night and this morning, and I just thought the whole show around it was one of the WCW at that time. You'd come off a great bash, you take the power bomb. Now I have to ask this before we go further. That power bomb looked like it hurt. The way Kevin threw it, the way Kevin tossed it, I'm like, either you sold it really, really well, or Kevin just overshot his shot there. Because that looked like it hurt bad.
No, it didn't hurt at all, actually. And selling is easy on a bump like that. You just pretend you're dead. You don't have to be a Shakespearean actor, to do a good job selling something like that. Just, kind of roll around like you're in a little bit of pain. Don't overact and just play dead till they pick you up and take you away. And that's exactly what they did. They came and they picked me up and they took me backstage, and I got up and high-fived everybody and jumped in my car and went to the hotel.
That's not a bad way to celebrate there. And, it felt like that moment there. Yeah, we had Scott came in, Kevin came in. But it seemed like that's, to me, the moment where everything took off. I hadn't ordered it. I couldn't tell you the last time I had ordered a WCW pay-per-view before the Great American Bash. And just to seeing that, knowing they were going to be there, and then seeing what happened. To me, that felt like that was really the key moment to me, because that set everything in motion for what we were about to see.
It was a good precursor because, attacking, and again, at that time, although some people knew I was the president of the company, I think I was president at that time or whatever I was, I don't know. But clearly I was running, for all intents and purposes, running the company. People knew that, but I wasn't wearing that on my sleeve. I was really still the announcer more than anything. And I don't know, maybe it had happened. I'm sure it happened before, but I can't remember it, or I'm not aware of it if it did, but kind of broke the unwritten rule, right? You never lay a hand on the announcer. When I came up in the industry working with Vern Gagne, that was like, written in blood. No matter what the announcer says to you. Now, the announcer has, for a long time, it was Gene Okerlund in the AWA, and then it was Roger Kent and others. But, the unwritten rule was, never touch the announcer. Well, I thought, that's a good rule to break. If we're going to start breaking paradigms, let's start with that one, because it'll definitely get people's attention. And that was the underlying, I think, psychology behind everything on Nitro first, and certainly within NWO is just take whatever the rules are for wrestling. Now I'm talking about 10 counts and count outs and, things like that. But, the general, framework for what everybody has accepted is, the way wrestling should be. And let's take a torch to that and see what happens. And that was the first big thing that we did. There were others too. I mean, Scott Hall coming down through the crowd.
That was awesome.
Seen that before? Probably not. Do some research. You think maybe you could find it, but I don't think so. And there was just so many things like that we did. But that was a big one.
You look at the guys you went with. Could it have only been? I know it's easy to say it now, but back at that time, did it have to be Scott and Kevin, and then eventually Hulk, or could it have been anybody else?
No, I don't think, the same story at the same time with a different cast probably would not have worked. And Conrad and I talk about this a lot on the podcast. So much of success is timing. People that are really successful don't like to admit that because it makes them feel less smart or look less smart, or talented. But, you have to be smart. You have to be talented to come up with anything that works really, really big in whatever business you're in. But you also have to have pretty good timing too. I've seen a lot of really good ideas that didn't succeed because the timing, they were either premature, those ideas were ahead of their time, or in some cases they would have worked better last year. But in the case of the NWO, I think the cast gets a big chunk of that credit, and the timing really gets a big chunk of that credit. And I think to try to have that same story happening at the same time with a different cast probably would not have worked.
I was listening to the podcast that you guys, when you did the Bash at the Beach episode, and one of the things I found very intriguing was the fact that, you were talking about Hulk and when he was going to turn, and he felt like even back in 94 that he started hearing the boos just because, he was new and, he came from up north and he was starting to feel it not too much into his run. Mm-hmm. Did that surprise you? Because when you said that surprised the heck out of me.
I'm not sure I got the question.
That he was hearing the jeers and the boos, and
he
had said that to you, and you really were, and you're like, I don't know. And I wasn't really feeling it at that time. And I was watching a lot of the WCW pay-per-views, and did that come as a surprise to you that he was feeling, I'd say, not accepted back even at that time?
No, we kind of knew that, Hulk Hogan, as a part of WWE or WWF at that time, coming into the WCW quote unquote territory, because keep in mind, WCW, when Ted launched it, he essentially bought the assets out of Jim Crockett Promotions and he created WCW. It was a startup. Yeah. And I think it started in 1989. So it was only a 5-year-old company when Hulk came in, or 6-year-old company by the time Hulk came in. And 6 years in professional wrestling is still, you're still a baby as a new company. So you're still a startup. But WCW was very much a remnant of the Southeastern territories. It still had a NWA feel to it, right? It still had a Jim Crockett Promotions feel to it. The audience that was watching WCW on TBS or on Turner of any sorts or in syndication was the same audience that grew up on Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA and Georgia Championship Wrestling and Florida Championship Wrestling and things like that. So for Hulk Hogan, who was the quote unquote enemy, or coming from the enemy, territory up north, they were still referred to. I remember when I got to WCW, everybody said, "Yeah, those guys up north." I'm going, up north where? Okay, up north. Right. Oh, you mean WWE? But they very much still had that he's not one of us vibes to it. And when Hulk first came in, he got the reaction you would expect to be good. It was very positive. But after a period of weeks and then months, and the longer the time went on, you'd get about a 60-40, 70-30 reaction to him. And, we both were seeing it and watching it. And I think in Hulk's case, he tried to, I don't want to say ignore it, but he tried not to let it get to him as he should. But it became more and more obvious, I think, as time went on, that it was time to make a change.
You had told me in the past that when we've briefly talked about this, that the backup plan was Sting. But when did you know that you were going to have that Hulk was going to be a consideration? Was it always, I want to go with Hulk, and then if it doesn't happen, it'll be Sting? Or how did that process play out to determine who the third guy was going to be?
No, it was really the opposite of that. I had a conversation with Hulk about 6 months prior to, towards the end of 1995. Okay. Maybe in October, November. I actually flew down. He lived in Florida at the time, still does. And I had my own plane at the time. I used to make, if I could think of an excuse to fly my plane, especially on business, so Turner was paying for it.
Nice.
I would do it in a heartbeat. So I recognized that we needed to do something different with Hulk. So I jumped in my plane, flew down and visited him one weekday afternoon. And I sat down, we had a beer. It was a very friendly meeting. And I said, Hulk, it's just not going the way I think you want it to go. It's certainly not going the way we were hoping it would go. Have you ever considered, turning heel? And it was a much more detailed conversation.
Yeah.
But I'm paraphrasing the hell out of it. But he sat back and he gave me one of these. And here's exactly what he did. He went, he looked at his watch. He said, brother, I appreciate you coming down, but unless you walk a mile in my red and yellow boots, you're never really going to understand. And I got to go pick up my kids at school. So thanks very much for coming down. You can take that beer with you.
At least you have the beer.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. And I had to spend the night because I had a couple beers and I wasn't going to jump on a plane that way. So I went back to my hotel, spent the night in Tampa and flew back to Atlanta. And then I think we used Hulk in 95 for his last appearance. Maybe we used him one time after that, but Hulk was only doing 4 pay-per-views a year at that time. So Hulk was in between pay-per-views. When Scott Hall came down through the crowd and showed up, and Kevin Nash showed up, Hulk was off in California doing a movie. He was locked on. He was locked on a set, and I had already talked to Sting. Sting was going to be the third guy. I went to Sting first. I didn't even go to Hulk because he'd already told me he didn't want to turn heel. So why would I go to Hulk and say, hey, did you change your mind? And had I known how big the NWO was going to be, I could certainly have probably put on my salesman's shoes and gotten the job done. But he'd already told me he wasn't interested in turning heel. So the idea of going to Hulk was the furthest thing from my mind.
Yeah.
So I went to Sting because Sting could have and would have worked. Not as well as Hulk, in my opinion, but it still could have worked. And it was going to be Hulk until I got a call from Hulk right after Kevin Nash showed up. Now, the NWO story was already on its way. Sting was already going to be the third man.
Yeah.
The train had left the station. And I got a phone call, and Hulk said, hey, can you come out to California? Because he was locked on the set. He couldn't leave. And I said, sure, I'll come out. And I flew out to California, got up to his some remote mountaintop location somewhere in the middle of California. It took me hours to get there by car. Got to his trailer about 11 o'clock at night after flying there all day from Atlanta. And we sat down, and he said, who's the third man going to be? I said, I didn't want to tell him because I hadn't told anybody at that point. Sting knew, of course.
Yeah.
My wife knew, but other than that, not many people knew. And I said, well, who do you want it to be? Who do you think it should be? Same
Good
old
question.
Dang.
Dang.
You're looking at him, brother. I went, okay. Hulkster wants to turn heel. Good idea, Hulk.
There you go.
Glad you thought of it.
Let him think that. There you
Well, in all fairness, looking back, Hulk's a very deliberate person. He's a very smart guy. He's got a great instinct for a lot of things. But, when I first went to Hulk about turning heel, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a story.
Yeah.
I didn't come to him and say, Hulk, I got this really good idea of how you could turn heel. I think if I would have come to him with an idea or a plan to at least make it look like it had been thought through, we would have had probably a different conversation. I'm not sure he would have turned heel or not, but we definitely would have had a different conversation. But just to go in and say, this shit's not working. How about we flip a switch? I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't know how it's going to work, but hey, let's try that. That would have been a really stupid move on his part. So the fact that he didn't want to do it, I think was more of a result of me not doing my homework and having a plan before I asked him, number one. And, number two, when he saw that opportunity and he saw the momentum that the NWO was beginning to create, he wanted to be a part of that.
talk about beer earlier with you and Hulk. Who can drink more beer? You or Hulk Hogan? In one sitting. In one evening, I'll put it.
That's a tough one. No, it's not anymore because I joke about drinking, kind of like, Ron White, standing there with his glass of apple juice that he pretends is scotch,
Right.
It's a fun joke and I throw it in there to get a chuckle every now and then, but I don't really drink that much anymore. I did over the 4th of July weekend. Oh my God.
I hear
but you. In the day when we were both kind of rocking it pretty hard and traveling a lot together and chartering our own planes and things like that. I'd say I could probably drink more beer, but he could drink more wine.
You a wine guy?
No, I'm not a wine guy, which is why he could drink more wine. He is a wine guy. And, back then in the 90s, I would drink wine, it's just, but it didn't work for me. I was just I just drink Coors Lights. I drink the weakest, piss water beer that they make, but it does the job for me. And I can drink copious amounts of it and not feel too bad. So
Coors Light, Eric Bischoff and Coors Light. Okay, I'm going to remember that one, Eric. I'm going to remember that one. But as we move forward, and how did Sting take that news? Was it like a sense of relief to Sting because he didn't have to turn because he was quote unquote the franchise of WCW? What was his reaction to when you we're going to go? The plan is now to go with Hulk.
That's a really good question and one that I would like to ask Sting myself. I know how he reacted to me. Super professional, understood, saw why having Hulk Hogan turn heel would be the best idea.
Yeah.
I think, when I first presented the idea to him, he was, because Sting is Steve Borden, very good businessman like Hulk, but he's much more thoughtful and analytical. Hulk is more instinct, or was, probably still is. He's more about how something feels when he hears it. Steve is he's a deep thinker.
Okay.
And sometimes he used to overthink a little bit. And when Sting would start overthinking, he'd get a little bit sketchy on an idea and a little hesitant not sketchy, hesitant, I guess. So it took me a while, a couple of weeks, I think, of conversations before Sting started going, you know what? This could be a lot of fun. At first it was like, wow, that's a big move. Very tentative in the first several conversations. But after, a while, it started to go from, that's a big move to, yeah, but then we could do this. And if we do that, then we can do this. Once you get to that point in your own mind about an idea, whether you know it or not, you're already gone. You're going, you're doing it. When you start having fun coming up with ways to do it, you've emotionally cleared that big hurdle. So Steve had cleared that big hurdle and I think was looking forward to it, but there was still a part of Steve Borden that was still a little analytical. And I think there was this is just my impression because we've never talked about that. I think he was relieved to a degree, but I also think he was a little disappointed professionally because I think part of him wanted to make a change. Part of Steve was a little, I don't say tired of the Surfer Sting character, but he played that character for a long time. When you're a performer and you're playing the same character, doing essentially the same things with essentially the same people week after week after week after week, other than having sometimes a better match with one guy than you had with another, everything's kind of the same. And it gets less challenging. And when it's less challenging, if you're a performer, it gets to be less fun. So I think Sting was looking forward to a change, and that's why part of him was really looking forward to it. But there was still that part of him that was like, no, man, maybe not right yet. So I think it was a combination of the two, but probably more disappointment than relief.
So then you have him you feel like you got Hulk locked in. You we're getting there, and you have Sting in, and you said and so when did you feel like then you, based off your response, when did you feel like you had Hulk 100% locked in?
About 5 minutes after it was over.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never heard you say this.
Yeah. No, well, not in that way, but look, Hulk, for a lot of the same reasons that I just talked about with Steve Borden, or Sting, Hulk knew is the reason he picked up the phone and called me to come to California, because he wanted to be the third guy. He saw that opportunity. There was a big part of him that wanted to do it. Now, in Hulk's case, there was still some hesitancy, and part of it, it's not a big part of it, but the human part of it was, gosh, I got two very young kids that are going to get hit with it. When this hits the fan, and in Tampa, where everybody knows Hulk Hogan, he grew up there. He became a huge star there. He's the biggest celebrity, or was back then. Now Tom Cruise lives right down the street. But at the time, Hulk Hogan was the biggest celebrity, in Tampa, one of them, I guess. And everybody knew him, and everybody loved him, and his kids, and everybody benefited from that connection to the community. And then to turn around and, turn heel, especially the way he did, he knew that his kids were going to take some flack for that. And as a father, if you don't consider that, then you're just kind of a douche, as a father. So, he was concerned about that. I'm sure, was a little concerned about, wow, baby faces get all the commercial endorsements, and he was still getting a lot of them even at that time. Baby faces get movie opportunities. Baby faces get a lot of fun things. Baby faces sell more merchandise than heels. There's a lot of, business decisions that go into changing a character, as well as, the other things. So I think that was part of it with Hulk. And then there was the people around him. And this, I used to tell Hulk, he says, he and I we're best friends. We talk all the time. And I used to say to him, I said, Terry, you're like a big apple tree. And you've got these giant apples, and you're underneath this tree, you got a whole bunch of people that, they're there to shake that tree as much as they can to get as many apples to fall off for them as they can, and some of those people had good intentions. A lot of them didn't. A lot of them were just selfish. And there were people around Hulk who had his ear that could create doubt and make him second guess himself. His wife being one of them, the major one, his ex-wife, Linda.
Yeah.
He had a manager by the name of Peter, still does, by the name of Peter Young. Great guy. He's been Hulk's manager since whatever, back in the 80s. They're very, very close. Peter Young is the type of the guy that is sure the sky is going to fall today. Now, he'll recognize that he said that yesterday too, and it didn't fall, but today he's convinced the sky is going to fall. So, and he's in Hulk saying, I'm not going to be able to get you any movie deals. And oh my gosh, well, all these opportunities we're going to lose, which meant all the opportunities he's going to lose as a manager.
Yeah.
So he was in Hulk's ear. And then there was the kids, and there was, a lot of other people that were shaking that tree, hoping apples would fall, were a little concerned there wouldn't be any more apples. So they were trying to convince him, in their own way to rethink what he was doing. And I didn't really know for sure he'd follow through with it until he got to the building around 8 or 8:30 that night of the event. The pay-per-view had already started.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't want him showing up until after the show started, because I didn't want people seeing him backstage. And once the show started, the vast majority of the civilians that hang out backstage are all out watching the show.
Yeah.
So it was easier for me to sneak him into the building to kind of keep everything secret. So I had him show up about 8:30 or so, 9 o'clock. And he came into the building, and he was with Kevin Sullivan and a group of others, including Peter Young and a group of other people. And I saw him coming towards me, once his limo pulled in the building. And I'm going, oh man, I hope he hasn't changed his mind. I really hope. I had plan B. Sting was ready.
Yeah.
If need be, Sting was ready to go. But I was really hoping. And he finally got close enough to me where I could hear him. And he said, okay, brother, let's do this. I went, boom. We got him. But even then, I've been around, celebrities and high profile celebrities, and they can be unpredictable. So
They can be.
I was really grateful for 5 minutes after it happened. That's when I knew it was going to be good.
So when he's cutting the promo, you're talking about at that point, you were like, okay, now you can exhale and you can go sip on Coors Lights.
Which I did, by the way, but afterwards, once we got on the plane and we're heading out of there, it was a moment. And I went out and watched in the crowd. I snuck up into the cheapest seats that we had available, put my hat down, hung it over my head.
Nothing wrong with that.
Threw on a pair of sunglasses and just snuck around. And I wanted to watch it. I wanted to watch it from the perspective of the audience in the building. I didn't want to watch it on a monitor. It's a pet peeve I have. I see all these people who, in WWE, they have the gorilla position, which looks like the Starship fucking Enterprise. Sorry, is this a radio show or is this a podcast?
Podcast, you're good.
Okay. So yeah, you go to the gorilla position of WWE, and it's a very sophisticated environment, very formalized, and in WCW, you had everybody trying to pretend they were, Vince McMahon or, Gorilla Monsoons. The boss is always on the can staring at the monitor. Well, guess what, folks? You don't feel the show sitting on a monitor with a pair of headsets on the same way that people at home watching it on TV feel it. You certainly don't feel it the way people in the arena are feeling it. So you kind of insulate yourself as a producer when you confine yourself to that, watching the show on a 12-inch monitor with a pair of cans on. So I typically would go out and find a way to sit in the crowd because that's how I judge things then. I watch the crowd. The crowd will tell you what they want if you listen to them and you pay attention.
Yeah.
And I don't mean, ratings and, analyzing dirt sheet reports and bullshit like that. But I mean, really going out and being out there with them, you'll get a different perspective than you do sitting in a gorilla position. So I went out. I camouflaged myself and went out and watched it like everybody else. I had just the biggest grin on my face.
I was going to ask you that. What was your reaction when
I was stunned? I didn't expect that. I'd never seen it before. I've heard that it happened in Mexico at some point, but I didn't spend any time in Mexico, so I don't know if it's true or not. I'll assume that it is, but not on this scale, not like we did it. And I had never seen anything like that before. So I was like, whoa, this is crazy good. They are really buying into this. And when you have the audience, I'm sure it's the same for, rock bands, any kind of a musical performer, when you have that audience. I know what it feels like to be in the audience when I'm really sucked into a concert. My wife and I went and saw Santana a couple of years ago in Las Vegas, actually, for my birthday. Man, I mean, I've always loved Santana, but there's a point in any concert, I think, where you connect with the performer.
Absolutely.
And you could feel that. You feel that connection. I had never experienced it before. So it was very much a stark contrast to anything I had experienced.
Is that your proudest moment in wrestling?
I think it's the biggest moment. I don't know if it's the proudest moment or not. I think creating the Nitro format, is probably something as a producer I'm more proud of.
Okay.
Because that format is what still exists today. A 2-hour live, well, now it's a 3-hour live show on Mondays, but it's a 2-hour live format.
Yeah.
Introducing the kind of backstage segments that we did, opening up the arena so that action happened in and around the arena as well as in the ring. It expanded our ability to tell stories in a much different way that had never been done before in many respects. I don't think you'd ever seen action go from the ring into the production truck while the show is being produced before. That's a little bit like two people getting in an argument back in 31B and 31A on a flight and it ending up in the cockpit. You don't ever see that. You didn't see that in wrestling, but you saw it the first time on Nitro. And a lot of those types of storytelling elements and devices were created for the Nitro format, and they're still being used today. Hey, I got Conrad blowing up my phone. Hang real quick. Hey, buddy.
Promise to be quick at a super duper cafe, but
whoa, hold it. You're on the air right now. Can I call you back in a minute? I'm on the air.
I can delete this part, Eric. It's not a big deal. If you need to talk.
That's all right. That's all right.
You know, you look at, like you said, you know, that you've had bigger moments, and something I don't think maybe you've answered this before, and I'm not sure. If it wasn't going to be Hulk and Sting said no, was there a plan C, or was it just those were the two options? And
no, I probably should have had a plan C in retrospect, but I didn't. You know, plan A was Sting, and he was bought in. The other thing I knew about Sting was that once I got him committed, he wouldn't change his mind. You know, he was very predictable in that. It was hard to get him to commit to something because he was analytical in the way he processed it. But once he committed, I would go to the bank with it. I would bet everything I own on it. So I wasn't worried about Sting changing his mind. But had I not been able to talk Sting into it, I probably would have figured out a solution. Had Hogan not picked up the phone and called me, I don't know what it would have been. Seems like Ric Flair would have been a good choice. Not sure Rick would. Well, though I think Rick would have been much more comfortable with being a heel than Hulk or Sting, because Rick loves being a heel.
Oh yeah. So no Mabel. Ha to people.
No. Mabel.
I had to ha that once. I've never said that to you, and I actually thought that was kind of funny.
It's a good running joke.
I thought an all-star of the night that no one talks about, I don't feel like talks about enough, is Tony Schiavone. And I remember when I talked to Tony before you guys did a show here in Chicago, and we were talking about his final line of Hulk Hogan, "You can go to hell." And he's like, just thought of that on the fly. I was like, I know we were just about to go. That was going to be the final moment. And that's when he said it. Why do you think Tony doesn't get enough credit? Because he guided that ship the entire night. Tony handled that perfectly. There was no screw up. There was nothing to hint at who it would be.
It's because he didn't know for sure. So well. Because nobody knew anything. But which doesn't answer your question. I think the reason that, announcers here, to me, a great announcer is like a really good journalist. They're not a part of the story. Yeah. A really good journalist is able to present detail both sides of an issue, or three sides of an issue if there are, and do it in a way that makes you interested, it makes you want to learn more, and compels you to do some research of your own, and they don't become the story. And today, and I think today's social media environment, reporters and people that cover sports and news and everything else, they're desperately trying to be a story. They're desperate. And I think with professional wrestling, that was true too. The way I was trained to be a play-by-play announcer, I was trained by Vern Gagne. He was one of the most kayfabe, traditional, stubborn, never going to change your mind kind of guys ever. He wouldn't smarten me up. I was doing play-by-play. I had no idea who's going to win what. I may have had my suspicions, but
yeah,
I may have also been wrong, so I never let them show. And I think because that's the way I was trained, that's the way I prepared or didn't prepare the announcers for this event. They didn't know. No, they may have had their suspicions, but since I didn't know for sure until Hulk Hogan actually showed up in the building, I guarantee you nobody knew other than the people that needed to know. And Tony Schiavone and Bobby Heenan weren't those people. I purposefully kept them in the dark and didn't tell them anything. And Tony's enough of a pro, and Tony and I were very close friends at that time and still are. Tony was enough of a pro to understand why I wanted it that way. So Tony wasn't pressed or he wasn't pissy about it.
Yeah.
He wanted to deliver what I was hoping to achieve, which is the element of genuine shock and surprise. That was my goal for that turn. And no matter how good of a play-by-play announcer you are or color commentator, if you kind of know what's going on in the back of your mind, consciously or subconsciously, it's going to shape the way you deliver your material. I've done it. I know.
Yeah.
And I think by keeping Tony and Bobby in the dark, although it did cause some rough spots, Tony, being the pro that Tony is, just went with his gut and his heart. And he was just like every fan watching, which is exactly what you hope for when you're doing play-by-play. You know, you have the best seat in the house,
yeah,
as a play-by-play announcer calling wrestling. And if you could still maintain the part of you that's a fan, a genuine fan, not a smart fan that reads fucking dirt sheets, but a fan that's just there for the love of it, and you can communicate that emotion, you own it. You own every single person that's listening to you. And that's what Tony did. Now, the flip side in terms of why didn't he get the credit he deserved, is I don't think people realize how good of a job Tony really did, because it was real to him. It's as real as it could have possibly been to him.
I had more of an appreciation for that. I always had a lot of appreciation for Tony, but I had more than I did going in before I watched that show last night and this morning, just because, like you said, he didn't know. So it's like he's just telling a story of, then he's talking about you and the storyline of you not being in the building, and maybe they had you hostage, and just the way he wove everything in and made it 100% as real as it can get really added another layer to the show.
It did. And what you just touched on is really interesting. And it was kind of the underlying thread, another one of the underlying threads that really made NWO work. I mean, the whole essence from day one, when Scott Hall came down, well, next week I'm bringing my big buddy. Who's that? It's a mystery, right? Get people talking. Who is it? Who could it be? Could it be Sid? Could it be this guy? Could it be that guy? Who is it? When you can get people asking those questions, you know, I guess they used to call it water cooler buzz, right?
Yeah.
You get people talking about something because they don't have the information. It's not a declarative statement. Next week, Kevin Nash makes an appearance. We didn't want to do that. That's the way wrestling had always been done. And by the way, unfortunately, it's the way it's still being done today. Everybody's reverted back to the over promotion. You know, next week it's going to be this match and this match. And then next week, these two are going to wrestle. The week that and that. It's like, fuck, I don't care. Give me something spontaneous. Give me something that feels like it's happened spontaneity in a spontaneous way. I used to call it spontaneous combustion. Give me that, because that translates to the audience, or creates in the audience a sense of, well, I gotta watch it, because if I don't watch it, I'm gonna miss something, because they don't tell me what they're gonna do, and it's really good usually. And I better watch it. I better not skip it, because I don't want to be the dummy that skipped it. That's how you create must-see television, is in wrestling, by doing things that people don't expect, that feel spontaneous, even if they're not. You make them feel that way. That's the magic that makes it work. But the magic in the NWO, starting with Kevin Nash, starting with Scott Hall, teasing Kevin Nash, and then it's going to be, who's the third man? It's a mystery. It's not just action. It's a mystery. It's not just good guy, bad guy. It's not good guy, bad guy mystery theater. Wow, another layer of entertainment just kind of on top of everything. And then add the layer of surprise when it's, you know, Hulk Hogan. Wow, another layer. It's just kind of like how entertainment should be. And I think, you know, Tony even asking the question, you know, where the hell is Eric Bischoff? Why isn't he here? And speculating about that, just another little kernel of mystery that fed into the whole mystery theater of who's the third man. So it was so good.
You had me. I thought something was legit wrong with you. You had me. You had 15-year-old me wondering, man, I wonder what happened to Eric. Maybe they got
him. And 15-year-old you would have probably come to that conclusion because of what you saw happen in Baltimore.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if they did that, what won't they do? Holy cow, all the rules have changed, going back to breaking the paradigm and just burning everything down, starting from scratch. I gave you a reason. We gave you a reason to actually believe that something had actually happened to me because of what you saw happen to me the week before. So it all worked. You know what drives me crazy, bro? Is none of this stuff is that hard. This is not.
No.
This is not Gone with the Wind here. You know, this isn't Shakespeare. This is really kind of simple stuff, and it's doable. It's different today because of social media, and people have become more hardened today, but it's all still doable. These are basic storytelling techniques that could be used today differently, of course, but surprises me. Everybody's just kind of doing the same thing. They're different. They're doing slightly different versions of the same thing, very slightly different versions. And I think what we're seeing in terms of audience and the popularity of professional wrestling as a whole in 2021 compared to 1996 is a result of just lack of depth of storytelling.
You led me in because I had two more questions, and that was kind of something along the line I was going to go. Because you look at what we saw in July of 96. You think about, I think it was 2 weeks before that, Steve Austin cut his promo. Then we get the NWO. And then really, after that, we really haven't had that big, like you said, water cooler moment in pro wrestling. Why is it, at least to me, why is the formation of the NWO 25 years ago the last really big monumental thing that has happened in wrestling?
I think because the real competition, and when I say that, I mean head to head, you know, Mondays were Raw's territory. They were Monday night wrestling on television was Jerry Jarrett's Memphis territory.
Yeah.
And we came in to take it. We wanted that territory. That was a real war. When Nitro went head to head with WWE, that was, in the eyes of the audience and for the rest of us who were behind the scenes, it was a real battle. I wanted to take their audience, as much of it as I could get. And that permeated through the television. They knew this was a real fight. Well, what is wrestling? Good guy, bad guy. You have your favorite over here, you have your favorite over here, and you watch them go at it. That's what we were doing, but in a bigger way. And it was like the Coke Pepsi wars, right? It was Domino's and Pizza Hut back in the 60s. You know, it was Hershey's and Mars back in the 30s. You know, it was Ford and Chrysler, you know, back in the late 30s. You know, it was that war creates interest, and that interest creates chatter and buzz, and the chatter and buzz creates a bigger audience because, well, what am I missing here? I got to go check this out. And I think the reason the NWO is today what it is, it's still very successful financially, believe it or not. 25 years later, the NWO merchandise catalog is one of the or NWO merchandise in the WWE catalog is one of the most successful catalog items they have to this day. And the reason for that is I think wrestling audiences know that was, they may not process it this way, but I think they feel like, wow, that was the best time in wrestling. That was the best time to be a fan because of the war, because it was a real war. It wasn't a cosplay war. It was the real shit. And people reacted accordingly, and it created a buzz.
I know you've answered this before, but based off of what you just said there, can that magic, we'll go with that word, can the magic of that ever be recaptured? Because I don't think so. And I hate saying that, but just every fiber in me says, yeah. But when I sit and actually take some time and think about it, I don't think so.
Could it happen again? Absolutely. Will it happen again? Absolutely not. Because your next question was going to be, why would you say that?
Actually, no.
It's just,
I know you were going to keep going.
Yeah, it won't happen again because I'm only hesitating because I want to try to say this in a way that's honest and accurate, but not mean-spirited. The environment that we all live in today in business, any kind of business, is much more of a risk-adverse environment. Television in particular, I think, has suffered more than anybody. There's not a television executive that I know of that would have the balls to do what Ted Turner did when Ted looked at me and said, take Monday night prime time on TNT, go head to head with Vince McMahon. Ted, that wasn't my idea. I was on the receiving end of that idea. I was just in the room and I had to figure out how to do it. I'll take the credit for figuring out how to do it, but the idea I can't take credit for making that decision to go head to head. That was all Ted Turner. Nobody's got the balls of a Ted Turner anymore in television. Nobody. And the executives that are down below a Ted Turner type level do not have the balls to do it because it's too big a risk. And people in television are the most risk adverse people you will ever meet in your life. There is a cover your ass protocol in the world of television today that didn't exist back then in the 90s, not just in wrestling, but across the board. So could it happen? Yes. If somebody had the guts and the patience and the talent to go, you know what, we're going to go head to head with Monday Night Raw or head to head with Friday Night SmackDown. We're going to do it. Then it could happen because it's not that hard. People will react to it and you can build on it if you have the patience. That's another thing that's missing today. Everybody wants something to succeed within the first 90 days. Good luck with that. But I think it could happen, but it won't because people just don't have the confidence in themselves or the confidence of the people that they report to.
You've been to AEW shows, you've been on TV. Is that a conversation you've ever had with Tony Khan?
No. I think Tony has a real clear vision of what he wants to do and what his goals are. So all my conversations with Tony have always been extraordinarily pleasant, but he's not taking any advice from Eric Bischoff. Let's put it that way.
Would you just give it unsolicited?
No. He can listen to the show if he wants. All he's got to do is tune into the podcast and he can hear anything I want to. He'll hear anything and everything I think, whether he likes it or not. But no, look, here's the other side of it. I've been out of the business now for a long time. I still have a pretty good feel for television. I'm still involved in the entertainment business. I'm producing a movie for Netflix right now. I mean, it's not like I'm sitting at home, chasing kids off my property, throwing beer cans at the neighbors, but, I'm out of it. And I think my advice, while probably valuable in some cases, is not for a lot of people right now because it's a different world that I existed in. And I'm first one to recognize that. I'm grateful I'm not in it. I wouldn't want to be trying to produce wrestling in today's environment. You not only have to worry about offending the network you're on and the advertisers that support them, therefore you've got, you make one wrong move and it gets misinterpreted or somehow offends the social media consciousness, you're going to get Me Too'd right off the air. Yeah. The creative lane is so narrow right now.
Yeah.
That there's just not a lot of room to maneuver. And you just got to go in a straight line, keep pace with the traffic. Don't veer off too much to the right or left, or you're going to hit a guardrail. That could cause you to wreck. No thanks, man. That would not be any fun.
We'll end with this.
Huh?
We'll end with this.
All right.
What should be the legacy, and what will the defining legacy be of the NWO?
I think innovation, in one word, it was the first time that it was the first time for so many things all wrapped under one story. It was the first time that the anti-heroes became a prevalent part of a storyline. The first time there was an anti-hero in wrestling. Everything was always cut and dry, babyface or heel. There was never, that, yeah, they were doing heel-like stuff, but man, kind of cool.
Yeah.
It never happened before. Just everything we did was the first time that it had ever been done so often. So I think just if you had to put one word on it, innovation.
You are not wrong with that. The 25-year anniversary today, July 7th, 2021. I remember sitting there. I paid my $29.95, Eric Bischoff. It went $15 of that went to you and the WCW for bashing.
No, it didn't go to me, brother. You wouldn't be talking to me right now. I'd be on a beach throwing coconuts at people that are going by.
Well, it went to WCW, went to Turner.
There you go. Went to Turner.
And went to Ted Turner, and you got a whole lot of credit, which was rightfully deserved.
There you go. I appreciate your $29.95 or WCW's portion thereof.
1996 from Daytona Beach. The NWO was created. The brainchild behind it, the great Eric Bischoff. Eric, we've chatted a lot of times in the past, but this was my favorite conversation because it wasn't all about everything going on in wrestling. It was focused on a grand event that happened 25 years ago. Thank you for the time, Eric. I know your time is precious. I thank you so much. And what is the topic next week on 83 Weeks?
I don't know. I think that's what Conrad was just calling me about.
He's going to be mad at me. No. He's going to be like, Steve, what are you doing? I'm trying to get podcasts ready. But Eric, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And look forward to the conversation again real soon.
All right, buddy. Be well. Thank you very much.
All right, you, Eric. Thank you, buddy.
See ya.